Hey friends, hope the day's treating you well. Hope you got your coffee. I had a little bit of coffee. I could stand some more, but I left it inside. I'm out here. It's been raining. It started sprinkling and it stopped for a second. And I thought I'm gonna run outside and I'm gonna try to film this before I get rained on. You might hear the water dripping off of the leaves, off the gutters in the background. Don't know if you can hear that or not. I love that sound. I get that from my dad. My dad was he was really into when it would rain. He wanted to get underneath a carport or something like that and listen to the rain hit against the metal roof. He would sit out in the garage and open up the doors and you could hear the rain hitting the roof in the garage, sitting there drinking a beer, just looking out the door, passing some time. I get that from him. That's good living right there. Maybe some of you can relate to that. Let the whole world slow down a little bit and just take it in. But I get that and I understand. But I hope you do too. I wanted to talk a little bit today about how the sausage is made. I want to lift the veil a little bit and I thought I have a little backstory to that Grant Alden interview that I thought you guys might enjoy. I know Grant Alden. I've known him for quite a while, but we're not close. I don't know him really well, but I've always enjoyed being around him. He's a very, very smart guy with a point of view. That's a good thing, you know, and he's walked down some interesting roads, and I have wanted to have him, and I've also wanted to have Peter Blackstock, who was his partner, one of his partners in No Depression magazine. Wanted to have one of them on for quite a while. Peter, if you're watching this, Peter, I hope you're doing well. He lives in Austin, Texas, and I haven't been to Austin, you know, throughout the pandemic. And Grant lives in Moorhead, Kentucky. Him and his wife sold a house in Nashville and moved to Kentucky, I think he said like 20 years ago. And they own a bookstore and a coffee shop there in a small town and seem to be enjoying life. But I wanted to hook up with one of them and have them tell the history of No Depression magazine. I think it's important. And a little bit of how the sausage is made. I think about these things and be like, there's not a huge audience for this story, but I think it's an important one. I wanted to at least get somebody telling their perspective of it and have it out there for, you know, people who care about such things, which is you guys. And, you know, that's fine. It doesn't have to be everybody in the world doesn't have to care about it. It's just that the people that do care about it, I'd like for them to know about it. And, or that might care about it if they found out about it. Anyway, so I contact Grant. This is the part where I let it in. I will contact somebody and say, hey, you want to do this? And I'll send them a couple videos that I've done before and say, this is what I have in mind. This is what I do. If you're into this, that's cool, and we'll do it. And he's like, yeah, let's do it, man. That'd be great. And I said, well, I knew that I had that Todd Snyder tour coming up, and I was supposed to meet Todd in Asheville, North Carolina. So I booked a house party in Knoxville the night before I'm supposed to meet up with Todd. And then I thought, well, hell, man, Moorhead, Kentucky is right in between, you know, here in Indianapolis and Knoxville. I'll just go a day early and pay for another hotel room, another night with a hotel. And so I contacted Grant and I'm like, hey, let's do it. So when you agree to do this, there's a certain amount of faith that jumps in that everything is going to work out all right. You just kind of have to go with it. And I can't go down there a day ahead of time and scout locations and things like that. So I just simply tell the person on the phone, it's like, we just need to be alone somewhere, somewhere quiet. It needs to be quiet and we need to be alone. That's really all I say. And that's not the easiest thing, you know? It just doesn't always, it's not that easy sometimes. So we show up and I drove 4, maybe 5 hours. We hit some traffic in Cincinnati. I drove 4 or 5 hours. My buddy Todd and I, Fox, who was going on the tour with me, we show up and we're, we walk into the bookstore. We're like, hey, Grant, this is the first time I've seen him in 15 years. And hey man, how you doing? And after we exchanged pleasantries, I'm like, well, where do you want to do this at? What do you have in mind? And he's like, well, how about right here in the bookstore? And the bookstore's quiet, but there's people everywhere. And I was like, do you have an office or something? And we're looking around. And I don't mean this as towards him. We're just kind of, this is what you deal with when you do this on Faith. And I show up. I never talk about gear because one, I don't want to do a commercial for somebody unless they're paying me or something. And it's not about gear. That's just not about gear. Some of my favorite YouTube channels, just talk into their phone, and it's compelling and it's great and I love it. So it's just not about gear. That's not the, if you get hung up on gear, you end up not worrying about the things you should be worrying about, which is the story that you're trying to share. And so I show up with my camera on a tripod. I have one light that I bring with me. And I have like a little rig for the sound to make it sound good. It's really light, and I try guerrilla filmmaking, So I said, is there somewhere we can go, that we can record this, like an office or something? He's like, well, we can go up to my office, but it turns out his wife was doing something really important up there, and we couldn't get in the office. And he said, how about we go next door? There's a room upstairs at a brew pub. And so we go over there and we look at it. It looks great. It's those big windows that you saw in the thing. I thought, this looks really good, but it's really echoey. And I'm like, all right, we'll just do it. We'll make this work. And so I get everything mic'd up. And he was a low talker. And it's hard, man, to make it sound good. And I'm stressing out. It took me about 2 weeks before I got home to go through that, but I was just really stressing because I knew this was wonderful and compelling and important stuff, and I'm just thinking, did I capture it? Did I get it? There's an airplane flying over. It's Mellencamp's airplane looking for me again. Anyway, so there's that stress of, did I capture it? Did I get it? When I got home, I did all the audio shenanigans to make it sound as good as I could and bring his voice out from the echo, but so it was a little echoey for my taste, but I think it worked. And there's just a leap of faith that you take when you go do that. I want to go to someone's home or their office and do it on their location, usually because I'm traveling to them. And you just hope that, as soon as you get there, you got to make decisions really fast. Like, all right, there's some natural light over there. I dig it. There's a little bit of backlight coming out of that window. And I'll walk over with the camera and try to frame it up. And, within 10 minutes, you've made a decision. And because they're not going to stand around forever waiting for you. Why should they? And you just got to go for it. And that's a little bit of behind the scenes of how that worked. I want to say that Grant, so I went into that. I always go into that in my head, into an interview of the things that I want to talk about, I'm hoping to talk about. I used to write it down on a list, some things that I'm hoping to hit. And I had noticed somewhere along the line that people would see me looking at my list. And this is way back in the podcast days. But I just like, that kind of sucks, because it always pulled us out of that moment. And so I started memorizing the things on my list. And so I just would not have any notes in front of me at all. And I would try to, remember the things in case we hit, brick walls. And I will also, this is a tip for people interviewing, the things that you come to this little interview hoping to have them talk about, those might be the most boring things that you'll cover. While you ask somebody a question, while they're answering you, they might just happen to mention a person's name or an event or something like that. I'll wait 10 minutes until they're done talking, sometimes 20 minutes, and I'll circle back and say, hey, you mentioned such and such name. How did you meet them? And that's your whole story right there. They start talking about something you didn't even know to ask, but you were paying attention. You were shutting up. You were not trying to get in every last little zinger of a joke, because I hate that when I listen to interviews, and I realize that there are personality-based things where people interview and they have someone on just so they can have someone there to bounce their jokes off of. That's not what I'm into. And when I started my podcast, I wanted to be the I don't know if that's the yang. I wanted to be the yang of that. I wanted to be the opposite of that and fail on the side of just leaving myself out of it. And so that's kind of what I'm into, which you guys have figured that out by now. But if you just listen, people will mention something, and you're engaged and you're paying attention. You circle back, and that's when the really good stuff comes out, the stuff that I didn't know to ask about. And so one of the things that I wanted to ask Grant about that I forgot because we started talking about other stuff that I really kind of wish I did. So years ago, maybe when I first met him, like my memories of No Depression magazine, my buddy Cameron Smith, who lives in Austin now, he's the first person to tell me there was such thing as No Depression magazine. And he was a charter subscriber, is that what you call it? Like from the very first issue, he subscribed from then on. And he's like, Otis, you need to know about this. This is cool. And so I started subscribing to it and looking at it. But they wrote about me a couple different times. And it's really weird. When he said they had, like, their highest circulation was that they would print 40,000 copies. And their first issue, they were printing 2,000. That's not very big. That's just a tiny little, niche. And I'm going to guess, I should have asked him, I forgot to ask, what's their highest subscriber rate? How many subscribers did they have to this magazine? And I mean, do you think it was 10, 20,000 at the highest? That's not that many, in the grand scheme of how many billions of people there are in the world, or how, millions of people in America, hundreds of millions of people in America, just that little thing. But that's not the point. The point is there are people out there who care. And when you bring something to their attention that covers that thing they really care about, they care a lot about it, and they'll support it. And that's what this magazine was. So I remember I was written about a couple different times in there, but back then I remember calling, because I was my own booking agent, trying to get a gig at some club in some other city I've never played in. And I remember a place in Kansas City. I wrote a song, Davies Uptown Ramblers. I remember calling the lady, just cold calling, like, hey, I'm passing through and I need a gig on that night. I'd love to play your place. And she's just really not responding. You know how it is. You made those calls. She knows this is going to be an empty night. Who the hell is Otis from Indianapolis? Who the hell is that guy? And she's like, well, have you had any press or anything? Which is an honest question to ask. This is way into the conversation when I've already blown it. And she's not at all interested. And she's just kind of like, have you had any press or anything? I said, well, there's a piece about me in No Depression right now. And she's like, No Depression? We love that. We love why didn't you just say that? And she's like, well, what night do you need? And like, well, I'm looking for this night. And she's like, great, let's do it. Book the gig. This magazine with this tiny circulation, but it mattered to the people who, it mattered to. It mattered a lot. Since then, there are so many promoters overseas, and like I'm saying, I'm not a person they put on the cover. I'm just kind of a guy that ended up mentioned, and they wrote some columns here and there about or reviewed some records. I've had promoters overseas say, I found out about you first because I read about you in No Depression magazine back when, and then bought your records and knew what you did. And then when you finally started touring over here, it was like, hell yeah, I want to book that guy. These are people I've played for over and over throughout the years. And they you know, they found out about me through this magazine that Grant, you know, put out, that he worked on his kitchen table to make. There's people, you know, in Europe that found out about me that way. And so my point to all of this, I'm going around in circles before I get to the thing I said I was going to talk about 5 minutes ago. But, you know, you're doing something right now, and there's not a big audience for what you're doing. You know, you have a zine. Think of every punk rock kid that had a zine in their, you know, that they made when they were in high school. You know, one of these turned into Maximum Rock and Roll. You know, it might be a tiny section of people, but they wrote about all these bands that people cared about. It becomes a really influential thing, influenced a lot of people, you know. So some of you might have a YouTube channel, and you're like, man, I don't know, I'm not really getting a ton of subscribers, I'm not getting the growth that I was hoping to get, blah, 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 blah. There are people who care, and there are people who watch, and it means a lot to those people. You are reaching people, and I realize, you know, when I think of subscribe, I don't worry about that kind of stuff that much. I'm just trying to talk to people, you know, and we're hanging out here as it rains, and I don't know, you're making a difference. You might not realize it, but you are, and you're connecting with people. And this internet thing, there's people, I don't know who's watching this. You never know. You know, I get contacted by people who are famous. You know, they send me an email. Hey man, I watched that, I like it. And it's kind of like, who knew? I look at everything I do, because I've always been in this DIY world. You know, just always, it's not fun to ask people permission to do things, you know, to walk into an office in a boardroom and say, will you put me on your big record label? You know, will you be my booking agent, you know, in this huge office, corporate environment or whatever? There's a lot of rejection, and it sucks. And to me, I always thought those people weren't interested. But, you know, the people who listen to the music and buy the records and buy tickets to shows, those people have always been interested. They've always been into what I did, so I just try to go directly to them, and that's all this is, talking directly to you guys who dig this stuff. So that's a little bit of hope in all of this stuff. One other thing I want to jump out to, Grant said to me when I first met him, I was going to say this 10 minutes ago, and then I got off on a side track, a very important side track there that I should get on more often. He's like, you know why I wrote about your record the first time? And I'm like, I don't know. And I was wanting to ask him this, and I forgot to. There's a squirrel back behind here who's going to try to get, I hope he doesn't jump all the way over here on the camera. But anyway, he said that he would get a few hundred CDs a month. You know, they'd put out monthly issues. It'd be big piles. They would show up every single day. You can't listen to all of that. You got work to do, but you have to write about things. And he said, I don't think this happens anymore because people don't get sent CDs all the time. He said he would have 3 different piles. And this is something he told me over 20 years ago, so I hope I don't know, I hope I'm not betraying a trust here. I think he would say this now. He said he would make 3 piles. He would look at the artwork is the very first thing. Actually, he'll say he'll go through everything, and there will be a pile that's like, of course we're going to write about this. You know, there's a new Merle Haggard record out. Of course we're going to write about it. There's a Buddy Miller thing. Of course we're going to, you know, things like that. Jack White just produced a Loretta Lynn album. I guess we ought to write about that, you know. There's that pile. And that takes up a lot of the magazine, you know, so there's only a little bit of space left for, you know, the things. And in that, of course, are bands that we absolutely love that no one has heard of, but we are going to be the people who write about it. That's part of that. And good for them for doing that. So I don't want to make it sound like the only thing they would write about is famous people, because they didn't. But then there's two other piles. One is they look at the artwork and they're kind of like, this looks dumb, you know? And you're having to make really hard choices because you can't listen to everything. And they're just like, really? Or it's obviously a band they know of that's just a completely different, something they don't write about, you know, and the publicist was just sending it anyway. So they like toss all of that out. So that was a large piece of it. And then there was one more pile to where look at the artwork and they were like, that's really cool artwork, or, you know, or this is something really interesting, or someone produced it that they really like. That makes it interesting. Someone is involved in the band that was involved in something else really cool. So it goes into a maybe pile. And he said, Otis, we sent an album, my first album, 49th and Melancholy, which was recorded in my buddy Nick's laundry room, you know, like a washer and dryer right next to me all the time on a 2-track reel-to-reel tape recorder because it's all we had. And I played acoustic and we made it and people cared about it. It's what we had. You know, I would have liked to have gone to Abbey Road, you know, or RCA Studios in Nashville, but I didn't. So I had a 2-track reel-to-reel and I sang my ass off and played my ass off and made the best record I could and sent it out into the world. He saw that, and my buddy Chris Francis, who's a great artist, made a really, really cool painting for the cover of that, the cover artwork. And Grant saw that and he's like, that's great, I love your artwork. And he's like, so we put you in the maybe pile. And my second record, One Day Our Whispers, was the same way. It was Chris Francis artwork. And he said that if you didn't choose this artwork to represent you, which it was a good representation of me, I felt like, is why I loved it so much. But if you didn't choose that, we would have just thrown you in a pile of like, we don't know who he is, so, you know, there's too many things to worry about, we can't go listen to everything. So I thought that was a really interesting thing to hear all of those years ago. And so you never know, man, so put your best foot forward when you know, do what you can, do the best you can with what you have. And I'm sure there's some versions of that right now that I don't know what they are. You know, I didn't know that was the case. I was just trying to, yes, I want to have great artwork on my record. That looks great. And anyway, I didn't ask him that. I wanted to ask him that so he could tell that story, you know, and it wouldn't be from my memory of 20-something years ago. But I forgot to ask because I drove all those hours. I was trying to set up a shot and all of that. And anyway, and then he started talking about the Mark Lanigan stuff. I wouldn't have thought to ask him about any of that, but the conversation went there, and I'm like, wow, this is great. This is wonderful, you know. And he saw Nirvana's second show. We talked about that after the interview was over, and a lot of stuff there that he could have talked about that was way better than the stuff I came to talk about. And that's the point of being open in interviews. And I'm hoping maybe somewhere down the road I'll drive back to Moorhead, Kentucky, and we'll try it again. Maybe, we'll see. But the last thing I want to talk about was there was something he said in the Mark Lanigan piece there towards the end. It's something I think about a lot. He said it much better in a different way. He said something about, as an older man, it's hard for him not to think of the price. When he hears the darkness in Hank Williams, Mark Lanigan, and Kurt Cobain, and how much he loves it, and how much it's, you know, he says it's hard for him to listen to it at an older age because he realizes the price of what those people went through to create that music and the cost of it. That's a little bit different than the way I think of it. I think, especially during the pandemic and being locked down and stuff, I just can't listen to any of the dark stuff. I'm naturally drawn to the dark stuff in music. I'm drawn to the Hank Williams, to the Townes Van Zandt, to the Guy Clark to, there's so many things. When I first heard Postcard from a Hooker in Minneapolis, the Tom Waits thing, I remember where I was and how dark that was the first time I heard it, and it just like, yeah, I want more of that, What's the Tom Waits line? I want to hear beautiful melodies telling me horrible things. I'm drawn to that in art. I'm drawn to that in movies, in books, and much in the same way as what we eat, how you are what you eat. It's kind of important to watch some of that because you can't be eating certain things or it affects you a lot. I think that what we consume as witnesses of art affects us, and sometimes we're not in the best frame of mind to deal with that. And I look back at the darkest moments of my life, that I was the most depressed or whatever. I was watching just like the darkest damn movies, the really sad. That's what I dig. I was listening to the music that was dark. I was reading Bukowski, I'm reading like all of this dark stuff that, doesn't help. It probably makes it worse in those moments. So throughout this whole pandemic, I don't watch very much TV or anything, but I just haven't watched movies or anything because this is great, you should check this out. And then I see it's like, oh man, I'm in no frame of mind for this. This is not going to help me right now. So there's a lot of stuff I've just avoided. And I've often thought, and that's the kind of stuff I write a lot of times. So I get it. It's what you express yourself, and it's what you're feeling, and it's real and raw, and I want to share that with the world. But I realize that sometimes people don't need to be going down that road. It'll be there. They can go down there when they're a little more equipped to handle it. And some of you are hearing that and you're like, what is he talking about? But I think a few of you are hearing that and thinking, I do think I know what he's talking about. I can relate to that. And so I'm just throwing that out there for you guys. Something to think about. Not telling you what to do or whatever, but it's something to think about. And I'll also say there is a great, great skill and art to being able to make people laugh. And especially when it's not cynical or degrading someone or whatever, but there's a lot of, I was talking to Amy about this, like Raising Arizona is just so damn great. It's funny. It's not, if it was that easy to make something that funny, there'd be a lot of that out there. But most of the comedy just makes you feel dumb. It makes me like think, do they really think that I'm this dumb that I think this is funny? But there are things that, great comedy is a hard thing to do, especially in movies. And comedians get it right on stage all the time. But anyway, I definitely turn to comedy in dark times to help me, just laugh and feel better. And I think a lot of you guys probably do too. If you're not, give it a try, man. So anyway, this has gone way off the rails, and that's a good thing. But like I said last night, I published a video that's the first experiment, trying something different. It's kind of like this, only a little more edited, whatever, but give it a try. Try it here. I think you'll dig it. I'm gonna put it right there, and I'll publish another one tomorrow. Click on that, give it a try, and I'll see you somewhere down the road. Much love to you.